to the viewers of New Indian Express. The Tamil Nadu is on the road to recovery in the fight against the COVID-19 second wave. But however, a lot needs to be done, and many experts globally and even in India say that there could be a possible third wave, and a lot of infrastructure preparations and manpower preparations and vaccination drive improvement. A lot of things are there to be addressed as we head forward in this pandemic. Here we have Dr. Pravdeep Kaur, Deputy Director, Indian Council of Medical Research and National Institute of Epidemiology, here with us, who will be answering a lot of questions and explaining more on this. Welcome, ma'am. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So going to the first question, with the active cases in Tamil Nadu coming down from 2.96 lakhs in July 1 to 1.6 lakhs by July 12, we can say that the second wave is gradually declining. In this context, what are the possibilities for a third wave?
Thank you. I think this is a very important question which everyone is asking. We need to look at data very carefully. The decline is not same everywhere. So you can see that although cities like Chennai, we had much higher number of cases per day and are declining faster, but there are other districts where the decline is much slower. So I think before we go on to third wave, we also need to remember that once we start opening up, there might be resurgence in several of these districts, and we need to prepare for that. So generally, we always say that lockdown is only a short-term measure to prepare and to improve our health system capacity to tackle the challenges. So yes, I agree, third wave is a possibility, but there is also a possibility of resurgence in several districts for which we need to prepare for. Now, specifically to answer your question on third wave, is third wave possible? Yes, technically yes, although experts are divided on that. The reason being, we have a virus which mutates fast. And the current variant, as you know, is more infectious than the wild variant. And we need to keep an eye. It can keep mutating further. The second thing is we still have high percentage of population, especially in non-metros, rural areas and small towns, who have not been exposed to the virus. So what we consider as susceptible population. And the third is that we also know that as we start opening up, we will find it much more difficult to identify the hotspots and contain them faster. So all this put together, we definitely need to prepare for the third wave. And we also need to prepare for resurgence within the second wave.
In the first wave, the peak of COVID-19 cases in Tamil Nadu was just around 7,000, 6,696, I guess. But in the second wave, it went as much as 33 to 35,000. What went wrong in the second wave? And in the future, should the state follow a proactive measure than a reactive one?
Yeah, I think this was not only for Tamil Nadu. The second wave, if you look at the number of cases, the highest number of cases recorded per day was much higher for every state in India. So what it tells us is that this was pattern of virus. As I mentioned earlier, there was definitely a change in the virus behavior. So I think what we really missed, I mean, if you look at local context, is we missed when this new mutant took over the wild variety in our population. So the way we could have detected it earlier is if we were doing genomic surveillance, which means every week, there are many countries which do that. You take a fixed number of samples and keep testing every week. Then you come to know when the new variant is taking over the older variety, and therefore you can prepare yourself for sort of in resurgence of cases or any untoward events. What we missed was we missed that shift. By the time we realized that there was sudden increase in cases, already our health system was getting overwhelmed, and then the only option left was lockdown. So we cannot really stop virus from changing its behavior, but we need to have a system in place to identify when it happens, and therefore act faster and have systems in place. We should know what actions we are going to do in such scenarios.
So in the second wave, when the cases peaked starting from April and throughout May, the state was clearly caught off guard. There were a lot of ambulances waiting outside hospitals. People were not getting oxygen cylinders, admission to oxygen beds, and even the ICU, and which resulted in many more people dying, close to 500 deaths a day. So could these deaths have been prevented had we had the infrastructure in place? And what are some infrastructural upgrades that we could do in the future to be prepared?
Yes, I think if you look at from last year until this year, already there has been a lot of development in infrastructure, especially in Tamil Nadu. As you can see, most of the medical colleges and hospitals were upgraded in terms of number of oxygen beds, even in terms of their ability to supply oxygen using lines and having tanks and all of that. I think what we did not expect, or what no one expected, was the size, the magnitude, right? That what will be the highest number of cases which we can see in a day was something totally unexpected. So, of course, it's not just a challenge for Tamil Nadu. We need to remember that. This challenge was faced even by developed countries. So, every state or every country can prepare up to a certain level. And then if the health system will get overwhelmed above that, it will be very difficult. So what we recommend from an epidemiological perspective is that we should monitor the bed occupancy. And if we feel that in a particular country or a state, your bed occupancy exceeds, let's say it exceeds 70 or 75%, that is the time when you start putting restrictions in place. Because nowhere you will be able to suddenly increase or double the number of beds. We need to balance, as we say, lives and livelihoods. So as long as our health system is coping well, we allow the economic activities to go normally. When the health system is unable to cope, we need to put restrictions in place. But we definitely need to up our infrastructure. I'm not denying that. And that's not just for COVID. Whatever infrastructural improvement we do, it will benefit the people even beyond COVID, especially when you look at small towns and many other districts, and you see that the ICU capacity is limited, right? So even though you can improve suddenly the number of oxygen beds by adding cylinders or by adding concentrators, you cannot suddenly increase the ICU capacity, because it's not just about putting a ventilator. You need trained workforce, you need infection control in place, you need many other clinical practices to be established to provide good quality care. So I think it's a good investment to do, and we should do it now. So in terms of infrastructure improvement, we need to look at 3-4 areas. One is, of course, oxygen beds, especially in small towns and in the secondary care facilities. Second is ICU beds. Again, a lot of ICU beds were added in medical colleges, but we need to understand now there are districts which do not have a medical college or have a limited number of beds in a medical college. So we need to also strengthen some non-medical college hospitals, which are bigger hospitals, where we could add additional workforce resources and provide an option to people for admissions. Apart from this, we need to also work on how to what extent we can be self-sufficient as a state in terms of producing oxygen, and then logistics. It's not just about having it. It's about being able to distribute it in time and having system in place to know how the consumption is, and accordingly allocating the resources. Now, having said all of this, one of the problems, if you might have noted, which happened, which many journalists also brought out, is people tend to prefer certain hospitals. So one was the real shortage, but there was also, in some situations, certain hospital getting more patients coming on their own, whereas other hospitals had beds, but no one was going there. So it's not just about adding infrastructure. I think we also need to strengthen our processes. So in the process, there are 2 processes which the government of Tamil Nadu tried to strengthen during second wave, but we need to institutionalize. One was triaging. If you remember, Chennai already had some screening center which were directing patients. So when a screening center is evaluating a patient, they are able to ensure that the patient goes to a particular facility where bed is available. On the other hand, when patient on their own make a choice, they find it hard. They keep calling multiple hospitals and they struggle to find a bed. So we need to strengthen our triaging abilities. Although Chennai, it has improved a lot. I think we need to do the same everywhere in the state. It has already started happening at the block level in many districts, but we should institutionalize that every patient who is detected, who is positive, should go through a triad system. So they get channelized to correct place. That is one issue. The second issue was actually the whole bed allocation problem, not knowing where the bed is available. So I think with the website, it became much easier. But I think there is still scope for improvement, how much more real time we can be, and how we can ensure that the facilities which have much higher level ICUs or much complex care abilities should be handling only complex cases. And the less complicated cases should go to mid-level hospitals. So having all these processes in place will not only help us save more lives, but will also reduce chaos and panic and make sure that patients feel that they are able to get access to the care they need.
So lack of manpower in Tamil Nadu of doctors and nurses could have been an issue in the past as well. But the state did not see a health crisis of such a big magnitude as we are facing now. So that lack of manpower could not have come to the fore. But now has COVID-19 exposed this dire shortage of manpower? And how can we as a state focus on streamlining doctors, nurses, and healthcare staff, and many more technical persons?
Yeah, again, I think manpower, the importance of manpower in health sector has been emphasized a lot during COVID, not just for Tamil Nadu, not just for India, but globally. If you say even the global scenario, we don't have just enough healthcare workers. So healthcare workers are a precious resource. They are fewer in number than what we require. Within India, actually, Tamil Nadu is doing better in terms of human resources in health. Having said that, we obviously need to add manpower, considering that COVID has added several activities which were not there in the health system before. And if we use manpower who are doing routine work, it is actually influencing the essential health services. We know that there's a lot of data from World Health Organization and many other surveys which have shown that essential services such as maternal and child health, immunization, care of patients for non-communicable disease is very badly affected during COVID. So keeping all that in mind, we need to now think and strategize. COVID is going to be there for some time, at least until we vaccinate enough percentage of population and we really get a hold of how to handle this virus. So we should add additional manpower, which should not be done on an ad hoc basis for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, because that doesn't help at all. People come and go. We need to put systems in place. And the addition of manpower, we have to look across the health system. We need to look at public health activities, secondary care, and then medical college. And if you see, a lot of addition has been done in the medical college because there were beds were increased and therefore doctor and nurses were added. But when you look at the field situation, we do not have enough addition in manpower. So we have been advocating that for instance, health inspectors, they are such an important resource. They do most of the field level activities. They handle the positive patients, starting from diagnosis, finding them a hospital, contact tracing, and so many other activities. And they involve local volunteers and other workforce. But we need to have at least one health worker for every 5,000 population. In addition to that, we need to have many more additional nurses in place, at least at the peripheral level. We need more health workers. And of course, we need more doctors. For the public health, one activity which is likely to go on for a long time is vaccination. And if we constantly keep pulling manpower from routine activity for this vaccination, that will hurt other activities. So we should have dedicated manpower for vaccination. And also not just manpower, also the spaces, the place for vaccination also we need outside the routine health settings. So it is not disturbing other health activities. Now coming to secondary care hospitals, if you see, there are all these government hospitals which are there at district or sub-district level, which do not have as much manpower as medical colleges have. But they are handling now large number of patients, especially in smaller districts, and they need to be strengthened. And we need to again add not only doctors, nurses, we also need to add anesthetists, physicians, and people who are trained in critical care so we can have ICU care available in the smaller districts as well.
Newer variants such as the B1617 and many more variants are being discussed in India as well as the globe. What are the things that the research and development and the monitoring public health surveillance system do to be prepared on intelligence of the newer variants that's coming inside the state?
Yeah. So as you know, we really cannot stop virus from mutating. All we can do is find out when a mutation has been introduced into the population. And I think it's not just about focusing on travelers. In fact, the whole concept of genomic surveillance is we should focus on population as a whole. So what we need is, as you know, there was an INSAGOG group of lab which were set up across the country, but the number of samples tested for a country as large as India were not adequate. I think what we need is every state must have genomic surveillance in place, and a fixed number of samples from every district should be tested there, which will help us understand if there is a change. Again, all mutations are not so important. Certain mutations, which are also known as variants of concern, we need to know if those kind of mutations are increasing in the population. So the only way to do that is a fixed number of samples tested every week or every 14 days from every part of the state. This is in addition to what you said about travelers. Of course, we need to test travelers as well. But you see, we are a connected country and a connected world. You know already the Delta mutant, which was initially observed in India, has been now detected in several other countries. And the same can again happen. Another mutant can come and will get introduced into our population. So we must strengthen our ability to do genomic surveillance on an ongoing basis.
Now, moving forward towards vaccination, in the second wave especially, a lot of youngsters were exposed to the virus. And even if you look at the health bulletin, people in their early, mid and late 20s without any comorbidities died due to COVID. Many were even in the ICU. So in this context, should we prioritize vaccination for the 18 to 44 age group, and how fast it should be fast-tracked?
We have to vaccinate everyone. I think that's the eventual goal. That is the only way for us to come out of this pandemic. Now, I think it depends a lot on supplies and other logistic issues. So if you look at globally, the trend has been to first vaccinate people who are at the highest risk of dying, which is 60 plus, and people with comorbidities. If you look at our scenario in this context here within the state, still there is a large proportion of elderly and people with comorbidity who are not vaccinated. So let's say if third wave comes, of all the deaths which are likely to happen, again, the large proportion will be from these two groups. So we have to prioritize and make sure that all the elderly and people with comorbidities are vaccinated. Along with that, of course, we have to start vaccinating all the other age groups as well. And within 18 to 44, again, there are people with comorbidities. So I think if we have to make a choice, we must prioritize people with comorbidities, people who may be having certain health conditions. And we can also look at people who are more exposed, who work in settings. As you know, last year, our biggest outbreak was in Coimbatore market. So people who work in settings where the exposure is very high, where there is a chance that they might be infected and they are likely to spread it to many more people. So I think those will be the categories which we need to prioritize. Of course, if the supplies improve and we don't have any sort of a demand-supply mismatch, we will be able to vaccinate everyone. However, in the current context, prioritization is very important.
While you said everyone has to be vaccinated ultimately, but schools are likely to open in the coming days or months. So how critical it is to also open vaccination for children and teens, as it is already happening in other countries?
Yes, very important. I have a 15-year-old boy who just wants to run away from the house. They're just tired of sitting at home. So, of course, we need to vaccinate them. As you know, in India, Covaxin already has initiated trials. for the younger age group. And we hope that those trials will be positive and will help us, at least one indigenous vaccine will be quickly available to us. In addition to that, we are also hoping that now that India has come up with a much more open vaccination policy, there are other manufacturers who will be willing to manufacture vaccines in India, or hopefully we'll have many more vaccines available in India. At least few of those might be approved for younger age group as well. But I think I'm concerned that it may not happen very fast. We would like it to happen fast, but it may take some time. But eventually, definitely, I think within 6 months or so, we will have options available for children and teenagers. And we look forward to that. And as a mother, I definitely look forward to that.
And moving forward to pregnant women who have a higher risk of infection because they have to go to hospitals for checkups or other things. So now that America and many countries in the European countries are also vaccinating pregnant women, how
Yes.
it is critical to vaccinate them also, because in many of our districts in Tamil Nadu itself, there is a call to vaccinate pregnant women. What is your
Absolutely.
opinion?
Yes, I think I totally agree with that. And there is a sort of committee at the national level, NTEGI, which makes these decisions, and they are reviewing data for the 2 vaccines which are available in India. I mean, from the point of view of many of gynecologists and many professional societies of obstetric and gynecology, they have recommended that pregnant women should be vaccinated. And I think even the public health community strongly feels that we need to vaccinate pregnant women, because it's very sad to lose lives. There are maternal deaths both in the antenatal and postnatal phase, and we are all looking forward to recommendations from NTEGI, which will hopefully come soon and will make vaccine available in the near future.
Now, ma'am, moving forward to the field level containment strategies, Tamil Nadu government as well as the Chennai Corporation has adopted various approaches such as closing down streets, triaging people at the doorsteps, and many more. How can we improve these field level strategies in a more proactive way to catch cases when it comes or as it comes, than to reactively do it after an outbreak or after the spread becomes severe?
Absolutely. I think as public health community, we strongly feel that the strategies to reduce spread, as we call them, need to be strengthened. And these are surveillance, testing, tracing, and isolation. The 4 pillars of public health strategy, all 4 we must strengthen. So I think let's go one by one and see where the weak links are. What we have seen in the last 1 year is that the government sector, the surveillance is very good. And in addition to the public sector facilities such as hospitals, PHCs, the government is also doing fever camps, reaching out. There are also fever surveys being done. But a large chunk of our population is using private sector. So what we have seen is that that is a weak link in our surveillance system. So we must ensure that private sector is on board. We need to build systems so they can report early whenever people with COVID-like symptoms are reporting to them. So currently, all the lab results do come. But then what about people who don't test? So there are people who have COVID-like symptoms who may decide not to get tested. And if they spread it to others, it will form clusters and they will be missed. So we must strengthen our private sector surveillance. The second area, which is very important for small town and rural areas, is pharmacies. So even during my recent interaction with colleagues from rural areas and small town, they emphasized that many patients just go and buy a tablet of paracetamol or an antibiotic and take it, and they do not go for testing, either due to lack of awareness or there may be fear that if I test, I may become positive, I'll have to isolate. There are many reasons why people may choose not to get tested. So we must bring pharmacies into surveillance system. And Chennai has already done that. You might have seen there was an order recently asking pharmacies to report. The same should be replicated and strengthened. It's not just enough to tell once, but we need to keep reinforcing, and we need to make sure that the reporting is actually happening. Third area where the government actually started surveillance, but it needs to be further strengthened, is the CT scan centers. People who undergo CT chest sometimes haven't undergone RT-PCR test, and we are likely to miss them. And they may go on spreading the infection without their own knowledge. So we must make sure everyone undergoing CT scan for chest with COVID-like symptoms should also be brought into surveillance. So I think these are the three places where we can identify symptomatics. Now, in addition to that, the fourth place where we need to strengthen our surveillance is workplaces and industries. As you have seen, we have a lot of industrial belts in the state where we have seen large number of clusters coming in, and a large number of cases specific to those districts. We need to find ways wherein we can detect those clusters early. So we need to really take the employers into confidence, and we make sure that they are comfortable in reporting. So they need to have a system where they identify anyone who has fever, cough, cold, sore throat, any COVID-like symptom, and report to a governmental system. The places, where you have organized industry, they sometimes also have their own doctors. They have their own dispensaries. So they can also think of doing sample collection there itself. They could collect swab and send, which will help in early detection, because many of these workers may not find time to go and see a doctor. And also, I think we need to generate more awareness. See, people may feel that if I'm sick and I'll have to take leave, so I should not tell my symptoms. So the employer should provide paid sick leave, which will empower the employee to report symptoms and feel confident that even if I have a health problem, I will be taken care of. I think by doing all these measures, we'll be able to improve surveillance. Now, the next pillar, which I said, is testing. In testing, I think we are one of the really good performing states, and we do one of the highest number of RT-PCR tests. But during surge, one of the challenge which have been reported by many people from the field is that when you have huge cluster in a small town or a rural area, you cannot do so many RT-PCR tests. So we should be able to look at alternatives, and we should consider using rapid antigen testing in settings where there are clusters, not as a routine, but only for cluster where we want to rapidly identify large number of cases and isolate them. And this is a proven strategy being used everywhere in India, also in other countries. I think the third area we really need to strengthen is contact tracing. We find that is not given so much importance as much as it should be. And the contact tracing, not just for family members, but quite often the workplace contacts are missed. So if we want to prevent clusters, we must capture both household as well as workplace contact. And lastly, isolation. So we need systems in place to monitor isolation. Chennai, we had focus volunteers, but the similar systems in collaboration with other departments. For instance, in rural area, we have rural development, we have Anganwadi worker, we have other village level functionaries, not from health, but from other departments, who could support these kind of activities. So I think one of the approach that we all feel which need to be further strengthened is decentralization of these public health activities to the block level. So in a district, you can do everything at a block level because you have multiple departments there. They can work together and they can actually help in strengthening all these pillars. And the monitoring also can be done at the block level, and the reporting can be done to the district. By doing that, we will be able to capture clusters very early, because for district to know where the problem is and then run, it may not be very effective, because many of our districts are also quite big, and the district level workforce really cannot reach everywhere.
As we wind up the interview, what would be your message to people as we head forward to take care of themselves as a self-precaution?
Yeah. So my first and foremost suggestion is wear masks. And it's been a huge challenge to convince people to wear masks. We have done 3 surveys in Chennai city, and we found that the mask use declined from about 33% to 25% between October and March. I'm hoping it has improved now. I've seen that during lockdown, anybody who came out, mostly people were masked. So even if you are vaccinated, you should continue to wear mask. Second is, of course, vaccination. If you are eligible and if you have access to vaccine, take any vaccine which is available. Quite often, the question that comes to me is, should I take this vaccine or that vaccine? Or should I wait for another vaccine to arrive, which may be better than these two? So please take vaccine. And I have been repeatedly answering on Twitter, and I want to emphasize this. Actually, many people are not taking vaccines for very trivial reasons. For instance, one of the common questions which has been asked is if someone is a smoker or someone uses alcohol, or if you eat non-veg, if you have any kind of other health problem, should I take vaccine? So none of these are contraindications. So please get yourself vaccinated. And if you have any questions, talk to a doctor, and you can consult anybody whom you feel confident, whom you trust, and get yourself vaccinated. There are very few contraindications. That's the point I want to make. These vaccines are essentially safe, and they have been put through highest level of scientific research. We can trust the vaccines. The next important thing is getting yourself tested if you are symptomatic. We still find after 1 year, there is reluctance. People feel, let me wait for 2 days, let me wait for 5 days. And finally, by the time they get themselves tested, sometimes they are very sick. So a lot of treatment options which we have, they work better if you start treatment early. Therefore, please get yourself tested. Don't wait. And don't hesitate that I'll have to stay at home for 14 days. It's perfectly fine to stay at home for 14 days, but you will be protecting yourself, your family, and community from this nasty virus. The next most important thing, I think, which all of us need to keep in mind is we need to protect elderly and vulnerable people around us. Because even in the second wave, we have lost many lives. And even many of the people who died, they never left their house. They were at home. So if you are a working age group person going out, please make sure that interact with elderly and vulnerable people in your house only with mask. Make sure that you are not sitting together with them, eating or doing activities which may put them at risk. And lastly, I would say that you must follow the COVID appropriate behavior, not only in public places, but also in workplaces. Many of us spend large chunk of time, 7 to 8 hours a day at workplace. And it's not enough to wear a mask when you go to buy vegetables, but you need to wear a mask, and you need to maintain distance and do all the other COVID appropriate behaviors while at work. And we all need to really work together to beat this virus.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.